let's go back to the start. Okay, so we have that. As you can see, I work for Linaro, which is basically focused on ARM. So I will go a little bit about the history, what do we have, what kind of ARM devices we are already having, what are the new kids on the block starting from this year, then what I call the 9 circles of installation hell, general support about Linux on these kind of devices, and how is my experience doing that, using that as a daily driver for my development work. So if you look at the history, this is not a new thing, obviously, right? ARM devices out for a long, long time. You have like in 2007, we started with netbooks, then the Chromebooks become more of a thing. Both of these are more categories where I think the focus is very much on the consumer to make sure that they can consume content, use a web browser. Chromebooks obviously are built around the Chrome browser, and it's more of the low to mid-range kind of price range for devices. So they're good for a normal customer, but they are not really suitable for a developer, at least for my personal use. It could be different for yours, but that at some point, when Apple started to switch over to ARM-based systems, I think 2020 they had it. That was a good start where you can see the full potential that would be available for these kind of devices, the battery life, all the improvements, the general power usage, and also the flexibility of what you can bring on this kind of devices in a shorter cycle of new devices. So then in 2020 we had the thing with Apple, and then after that other device manufacturers started to look what kind of device they can bring out with ARM chips as well. And we had the ThinkPad X13S. We had also other vendors bringing out some smaller systems. So that was the kickstart, I would say, where they're testing out the water, figuring out if that is something they have enough market to actually sell enough devices to make it useful for them. So in this year, this changed quite a bit. So we have this year, we had in mid of the year, there was a big launch from all kind of Snapdragon X Elite devices with a lot of vendors chiming in that. So we have all the big ones like Lenovo, Dell, HP, Microsoft, Samsung. All of these are bringing out devices. And for my last counting, there are a lot of variants on that, but they're over 100 devices. A lot of that are different memory, storage, and display combinations, stuff like that. But I think if you iron that out, there are still over 30 devices that are available in a big range of price, aesthetics, preferred manufacturer, and so on. So that's a good thing. You have a lot of choice to actually go around and pick the ones that are actually suitable for you in these kind of terms. And then later this year, they also launched the X Elite Plus variant of it, which is a bit of the mid-range, where you have a less number of cores. I think it's 10 versus 12 cores. You have reduced CPU frequency and so on. So that makes the market even wider. So you have cheaper devices that are available and not only the premium line. So we have these devices. What we're doing with them? How do we get Linux on them, right? So what you do nowadays, if you want to do that on an x86-based system or something, it's super easy. You just put in a USB drive with the distro installer ISO, and that's it. Everything is detected, everything works. Yes, there are some small culprits here and there, but in general, that is not a problem. But as I said, I worked in open source for 20 years, so I remember the times where that wasn't the case. And sadly, what I had to go through here remembered me about that. So the first thing you to keep in mind is these devices, the focus is very much on Windows on ARM. That is a focus. That is what the vendors are coming to, and they want to support that. That is the use case they're having, and that is what is driving the sales. Which is not a problem in general for us, but obviously if they only focus on this specific part, we always need to catch up and make sure everything is working for us as well. Not a new story for Linux, but yeah, that's how we're having. So what they do, they have normal UEFI booting and ACPI for device description and detection and so on, which is general, okay. That's something we supporting in Linux for a long time already. The culprit here is, on the other hand, that the ACPI implementation in all the boot firmware we have seen is not compatible to the one we have in Linux. That means we either need to change the ACPI implementation to extend that one to support that, or we need to find other ways. So as far as I understand it, it is very unlikely that the ACPI support in Linux will go and be extended to support these kind of devices, how they are described. I don't know all of the details of that, but it's very unlikely to go. Luckily, we don't really need that. So the ARM ecosystem for a long, long time has device trees, which describe the hardware, describe how all the things are connected. And if you give that to the kernel, you can really boot the kernel up and he knows everything about the hardware that is there to know. Normally, if you ship devices with that, the device tree is in the boot firmware already and is then passed on to the kernel and then maybe with an overlay modified or so on. Here we don't have that because the vendor relies on ACPI on that case. So we need to make sure that we bring our own device tree. Fair enough, we can do that. It's just another thing we need to add to the table, right? In my situation, I have a device with 64 gigabyte of RAM. I had to jump through another hoop. So Grub is running out of stamina to really go through all this memory and finding the stuff. And it's basically dying in the process of doing that. So what you need to do is you limit the amount of memory Grub is searching for all the components that it needs for the boot up. If you limit that to something like 4 gigabyte or something, he's more than happy to find all the stuff and then can boot up. Again, not a big thing, but dealing with building your own Grub and so on could be really annoying. So in the end, what that means is we have solution for all of these problems, but the current situation we have is that we have to bring these all on our own, right? So that's what I call bring your own installer artifacts. You have to make sure that you have your own kernel. Even the latest vanilla one might miss some patches depending on the device you're having. You need to make sure that the modules and firmware is installed in the init.id. You need to update kernel init.id and also do the device tree in the installer image. So that means you need to create your own installer, basically. There is a community that is working around that they're helping you. They create these kind of images for you. So it doesn't mean that you have to do that on your own, but it's still quite a painful process to it as well. The only distro I know about that has very bleeding edge support for that is Ubuntu. They are working on a concept distro, especially for these X-Elite devices. I think that, yeah, they call it a concept image or something, what they're having for that. The other ones, I see there's a good ARM support, but you need to either bring your own kernel or you have to wait for a couple of months until all of these things are picked up. Another thing is, if you want to make sure that everything is working, you might need some firmware that's only available on the Windows partition. That means you can't just go what I normally would do, install Linux and remove everything else from the hard drive and have enough space and just let Windows go. In this case, it's better to keep it running, make sure they actually do the setup process and disable BitLocker because you want to access it later on. So yeah, as I said, all of this really remembers me of the good old days, how hard it was to install that. But there's good things about that, right? I mean, I start with a really dark view on all of that because that was quite a painful process to get it all started, but it doesn't mean that it's not really worth it. The good thing is that the Qualcomm SoC in the chip and all the connected different building blocks, IP blocks and so on, there's very good support for that in the kernel already. Some of them are reused from existing systems. Some of them have been just having good support from the start. So Qualcomm themselves posted support for this kind of SoC 1 day after the SoC launch of the devices and so on. The problem we have here really facing is like how the vendor implement all the parts in the boot firmware and how that is set up for the build. But in general, the basic building blocks are there. You have like all the stuff in green that's already supported. In yellow, that's basically work in progress, patches on the mailing list. There's various states of that for audio, for example, depending on the device you're having, and so on and so on. Even full GPU acceleration with Mazer and Freeduino is working on my device, so that's a really good thing. So what is the summary of the daily usage that I'm having? So there's quite a good things. After the installation, the pain normally stops. It's very comparable in performance, so I have a comparable device. So I use a Dell laptop, one x86 and one ARM, and the performance is really comparable, so there's no drawback or something like that. Acceleration for GPU works, I said about that. Most of the firmware for all of that is already upstreamed, worked from Qualcomm to get that into Linux firmware. So that means all the distros are going to ship that. So that's easy. There are a few things that might be an exception, but there's work ongoing for that. All the main distros have ARM64 support for a long, long time. So there is no need to like be any problems you might see coming for your daily usage or something like that. And if you have some x86 binaries around, you can still use something like SpexEmu to emulate that, so that might help you out. So on the Linaro side, we are really eating our own dog food here. So we are really more and more of my colleagues getting ARM64 laptops. We are using that as a daily driver. We are reporting bugs, we are fixing things and so on. So there's really good progress going on. The negative side, obviously I talked about the installation. Kernel, you might not be able to use a distro package, but I hope that will be solved in the next couple of months. Things are work in progress, so suspend is not as efficient as it should be. You can suspend, but not everything is powered down as good as it could be. Things are work in progress for camera and video encoder and so on. There's also the NPU in that one for all the Copilot AI stuff and so on that is not used at all. If you find a use for that, you might have some extra resources that you might be able to use. As a developer, for me that's really convenient. I might be a bit of like a strange situation here because I do a lot of ARM development, and if I can avoid all the cross-compilation, things are getting a lot easier for me as well. So my kernel build times are only like 2 minutes. If I do a Chromium build for the full browser of the Debian package, a rebuild or something, that's 5 hours. That sounds a lot, but if you do the cross build on x86, that's more like 8 hours, right? So that's the level we are talking about. The same if I do a Yocto build or something, it's like 50 minutes on my x86 and only 30 on the ARM system. But as I said, that's the benefit here is the cross compilation. You have like a full day of battery life, or even more depending on your usage, definitely. You have all the breadth of all the packages available from all the distros. In my case, it's Debian. And there's a continuous effort from Qualcomm, Linaro, and other community members going on doing more support there on the mailing list. So there's almost no day that goes through that any of these patches are being sent out, pushed, reviewed, or something like that. So as I said, I hope in a few months this is really like all behind us with the installation problems. So tips, tricks, and hopes. What do I have? So keep the Windows installation, even if you don't want to have that, or at least keep a copy of it so you have access to the files. You need to be comfortable right now to build your own kernel, create init IDs, do your own grub config, and so on. If you have like USB-C, be sure to like try the connector in different orientations because sometimes the detection is not working as suspected. As I know, I know. But these things are worked on. I know that patches are floating around to fix it. Sometimes you have to do that. I just want to share my knowledge here. So there's a tree that's actually supposed to help with all of that, collecting all the patches from a colleague of mine, Johan Hobolt, who's collecting that, and that could be a good base if you want to try that out. And there's a very active community channel on OFTC that is helping out all the people. They are sharing like their installer images and so on. So my hope is that if this is going to be successful and the vendors see this is a good market for them to actually get more and more devices out, they will follow the same approach they did before, where the main vendors like Dell or Lenovo offered you a choice to actually have a Linux installation on the devices. At that point, if they do that, they will also take care about boot firmwares are getting updated, all these pieces are in place and so on. So that's something I would hope for. So in summary, finally, we have a good range of devices. I was always like annoyed that you only have things like Chromebooks and so on that are not really suitable to do that. The initial installation is painful. All of the things are catching up. Ubuntu is leading the pack here with their concept installer, but all the other ones are picking up. It's not like Red Hat and all the other ones. They have very good ARM support. It is more like really bring all the small pieces together here to have like a good out-of-the-box experience, basically. The hardware is work in progress support. The main things are working, so that's my daily driver, basically. I do the development there, but as I said, things like suspend could be better, maybe the camera and stuff like that. So what I always say is that's more like for early adopters, for tech-savvy people that are willing to invest some time here and go through some pain, but not so much for normal users. So I wouldn't give one of these devices to my wife, for example, right? That is just, I mean, why would we do that? You have to wait a little bit longer and then it might be better. And just to remind, I hope that if this is going to stay, then the vendors will actually take care of that and will put a Linux on that. Okay, so I finished up with 20 seconds. That's perfect.